Joe Bernick.
This is number 4, right? And Joe, raise your right arm. Is that sort of from juvenile institution?
I do.
So what's your full name, Joe?
My name is Joe Bernick.
Bernie?
Bernick.
How do you spell it?
B as in boy, E-R-N-I-C-K.
Okay, thank you, sir. Sit down.
And you live in Tucson, Mr. Bernick?
I've lived here since 1980. I live at 833 West Altura Street.
And would you maybe give the judge a little bit of capsule of what your background is as an active citizen involved with important public issues?
Yeah, I've been politically active since 1962 when I was 16 years old. I did my first protest kinds of things when I was out of high school in 1964, 17 years old. And I've been an activist, often full-time, more than full-time, 67 hours a week most of my life, with a semi-interruption when I was less active, when I spent 3 years in law school and became a father. But even then I was active politically. And before I moved here, it was in Minnesota, except for my law school was in North Dakota, but I lived in Minnesota during that time. And since I moved to Tucson, I've been very active in many organizations, including in the 80s. I was very active with the Southern Arizona Coalition for the Homeless, where we did a lot of camps with tents with homeless people and people that weren't homeless that camped out together. We didn't do them in parks, we did them in public buildings. We did the city hall, not the city maybe, but the county building, the old one. We did the state building, we did the federal building. Some of them lasted a long time, some of them lasted, we got busted the first night, it depended on the location. But when we were busted, the city magistrates threw it out and said we had the right to be there. Of course, these weren't parks. We did actions in all parks. I got to know a lot of the homeless people that are, some of them I even see at Occupy Tucson today. One of the things I learned, for instance, from working with homeless people is that Armory Park is a place where African American homeless people stand out, where a lot of Tucsonans are afraid to come. So it was very nice to see Occupy there and welcoming people and lots of people. Instead of people being afraid to go there, it became a place that people welcome, and these African American guys were happy. They were welcome too, and they could get to eat and have a place where they were safe to sleep. So that's part of my experience. I've mostly, though, been active in the peace movement for all these years. Before this year, for the previous 12 years, I coordinated the Tucson Peace Fair, but from about the mid-90s until a couple of years ago, I worked with the Tucson Peace Action Coalition. We coordinated large demonstrations for several years. It was 3 a year, including in 2003 we had big demonstrations of one had 6,000 people. I coordinated that. I've done a lot of those actions, small ones, big ones, but in all my experience, only once did we ask for a permit, and the one time we asked for a permit and we were given permission to be at Catalina Park. That's the park on 4th Avenue, about a block south of Speedway between 4th and 5th Street. The one time we got permission, we were asked to leave. So even though we had permission. Every other time, we don't ask permission. We have First Amendment right. It was respected. And I'm talking about over 100 large demonstrations, and both the Coalition of the Homeless, peace demonstrations, labor actions, because I was also vice president of one of the teachers' locals here, union locals here, and I've done a lot of labor stuff. The ones I coordinated, my experience is that we have First Amendment right, as long as we're not asking for exclusive use. If we're asking for exclusive use, for example, I worked with some of the things on immigrant rights, and the issues with immigrant rights, you ask for exclusive work. The immigrants ask for exclusive use of the park because they want to keep out these guys who walk around with guns, the right-wingers that walk around with guns and threaten, disrupt, and they have an interest in keeping them out. But peace demonstrations, we've never had to do this. With coalition of homeless things, we never did this. Labor actions, we've never had a reason to ask for exclusive use, because the public is welcome and the public is generally sympathetic, and we don't mind having some verbal arguments and stuff with a few people that disagree with us. Generally, counter-protesters, if they're smart, they go across the street, because if a few people join your big demonstration, it just looks like you have more people. So that's my experience in these movements, what drew me to Occupy, and I'm not a participant in Occupy, but I'm a supporter, and I've cooked several meals for them, and I bring them down, and I throw money and things. And one is getting to know Mary, and she didn't mention it, but her house was foreclosed, and she became homeless, and she was down there sleeping in a tent because she needed a place to sleep, and that's the prop. At demonstrations, you often have props that fit the demonstrations. Labor unions have certain kinds of signs. Other demonstrations, sometimes we have puppets. Sometimes, different demonstrations have different kinds of props that fit the message you're trying to get across. So when you're protesting foreclosures, which Occupy does all the time, foreclosures and homelessness and poverty, sleeping in a tent and having to have a place to sleep is the prop, is the exact thing that goes along with it, like the protest we had back in the 90s, and that's part of the thing. Sometimes, for instance, we have a peaceful demonstration, we don't have a permit to use the street, but sometimes the police allow us to use the street, even though it disrupts traffic, and even though it's against the law, and without a permit. We've often been allowed, we've had big demonstrations like that big one I was talking about, and they let us march the whole length of Speedway on a Saturday morning, down Speedway. It gave us the whole lane. That disrupted traffic, that was against the law. Now, of course, sometimes you get some youth that are hot-headed, and they just can't, they want to do something because it's the day the war starts or something. So they take to the street. We're on the sidewalk, and they take the street, and they get arrested. They understand that they're going to get penalized. And sometimes you break the law knowing, and I've also have done civil disobedience. I got arrested inside the federal building once protesting something, but I got convicted and I had a year's probation. But in those kinds of instances, you're violating the law, and there's a compelling reason that they're not going to let me stay inside the IRS office after closure. I understand that. So I understand also from my legal standing, and that aided me in all these activities, that there has to be a compelling reason to disregard the First Amendment rights. A compelling reason, not just a reason, as the city attorney says. There has to be a compelling reason, because First Amendment rights are overwhelming. I mean, this is a very, very, very important right that our founding fathers insisted on before they approved the Constitution. And I think we need, and that's always been our assumption whenever we hold actions, that we can only be restricting if there's compelling reasons.
Let me interrupt you and ask a couple questions.
Sure.
Because you've been around a long time. I have too. How many demonstrations do you think that you participated in?
Participated in or helped organize?
Participated in demonstrations.
Oh,
Approximately.
in 50 years, probably 2 a week.
2 a week?
Maybe not. I mean, not first. The last 30 years, probably an average demonstration. No, maybe not 2 a week. 2, 3 a month.
Okay.
Last 30 years.
How many of those were after 10 o'clock at the park?
After 10 o'clock at the park,
I mean, excluding what we're all going through here with Occupy.
excluding Occupy, maybe a handful.
Yeah. Go ahead, Joe. I didn't mean to.
Yeah.
Right.
So, and they weren't with tents. Okay. Although, yeah. The ones we did with tents were also public places, but not they just didn't happen to be in parks because we were directly petitioning government, and they were much more disruptive. And when we do a demonstration, we understand that it creates a certain hardship. Of course, sometimes the biggest hardship to the citizens is the huge amount of money that that the city spends on the police, because you go to a peaceful demonstration where historically, like I do the Peace Fair, I did it for 12 years, and one year, the exact year that the budget, crisis, the city budget crunch hit the paper and everything. So all of a sudden, that's the year they decided to have a meeting with us, and the city has 12 people, 5 cops in uniforms, and all these city people, and we have a meeting. Here's an event that's been held for, this year is the 30th, on a 30th Peace Fair. We've never had an incident. This was maybe the 25th. And 25 years, you never have an incident, and all of a sudden they have this big budget crunch. So all of a sudden the city decides to take 5 cops in uniform and all these other people and have a meeting and spend all this money when you've never had a problem. They've never had it since. I mean, there has to be reason, and demonstrations. We have a demonstration at a public building, and it does interfere with people having access to the building. Of course it does. It's a crowd. You have like I say, sometimes you take a lane of traffic. The cops actually ask you to. There's all kinds of ways that exercising your First Amendment right, or any right that we have, might interfere with people's rights. And we try to take that into consideration when we plan things, because we don't want to make enemies with the public. We want to, when you're petitioning the government, you're also trying to reach out to the public. And I could see that with Occupy Tucson. They not only welcome the public to come, that's the purpose. So the purpose is to engage the public. The purpose in this kind of a demonstration, like when we used to do the homeless camps, the purpose is not only to invite homeless people to come and participate, but also to involve the public, just curious people, to come by and learn and participate, in the action and in the camp itself, or come and talk. And it's an invitation to the public, because we're trying to influence public officials and government, but we're also trying to influence public opinion, like most actions.
Is part of the occupying a space with these political objectives part of the message itself?
Well, if you want to demonstrate homelessness, if you want to demonstrate that Mary lost her house and she needs a place to do, putting her in a tent overnight, where she, in a tent, not on the sidewalk in a sleeping bag, but in a tent where you can actually pitch a tent, is a demonstration that's very clear. It's a prop, and it's a very clear illustration of homelessness and one of the ills of our country that there's no excuse for. We didn't have homelessness during the Nixon administration. I mean, why should we have homelessness now? And so definitely so all these things are props to making the point.
Yeah, other than pride, isn't part of it that there's a series of issues that aren't being addressed, that must be addressed or need to be addressed, and sort of occupying a space, saying, hey, we're here, these are issues, and
well, a camp
the public and the politicians need to pay attention.
A tent camp is by definition that, but there's other ways to do that too. Yeah, that's one way to protest. Sometimes you, just by having a venue for the protest, you're doing that. You always have a venue, but often you pick your venue. If you're demonstrating against immigration policy, I've been to demonstrations where the immigration office is down there by the base. You go there, or the border patrol station at Ajo. We do a peace vigil in front of the federal building every Thursday since 1981, and I go to most of those. And we do that in front of the federal building because that represents the federal government, and it's a foreign policy issue. So you do that, so you pick a venue, and if it's a tent city, if it's a camp out, then that has to be an occupation. So it depends on the venue and what the props are and what kind of a protest you do.
In your experience, has the Occupy movement nationwide been singularly successful?
I checked last night. I went on Google, and billions and billions of things came up. So obviously more than anything in the last year politically. So it's the #1 American issue of the year by 1,000,000 times more than the second. So it's obviously, that's clear that it's been a great issue.
That's all I have.
Did I understand you, sir, to say that you're trained in the law?
I'm trained. I never took a bar exam. I've never been able to pass a bar.
Are you familiar with the concept of stare decisis?
I don't remember the Latin exactly.
You would agree with me that the law is a living, growing thing?
Of course,
Okay, so you would agree that it evolves over time?
of course.
Okay. So,
Everything does.
if I understood you correctly, your belief is that Mary's purpose is she needed a place to sleep. That's the reason she's in the tent down there.
No, she's, no,
Well,
no, I
correct
didn't
me
say
if I'm
that.
wrong here, you said she's down sleeping in the tent because she needed a place to sleep.
Figuratively.
Oh, well,
I mean,
I guess you didn't make that clear.
She did need a place to sleep, but
Okay.
it's not like she didn't have alternatives, yeah.
Thank you.
She had, how many parks are there in Tucson?
And we had no friends,
Yeah.
relatives, several would have taken me and I
Yeah,
chose
yeah.
that path.
Okay, Mary, we'll leave that.
Sorry.
Can I continue?
Yes, sir.
You mentioned that none of the, or a handful, I think you said, over 30 years, were in the parks. Where did those occur? Were those here in Tucson?
Some of them,
And
yeah.
you stayed overnight in the park?
No.
Okay. I guess nothing else, Sharon. Thank you.
No.
Thank you, sir.